Alright, composing these compositions is, when using Prismacolor, all you really need is an idea in mind. And this is no consequence sort of stuff, so don't make it high pressure. Let's say we'll compose like 4 different images. And they can roughly be about this size. Maybe I'll throw another smaller one in there. Let's go a smaller one like right there. So let's make them longer than they are taller. So longer than they are taller. So we have sphere, we have cylinder, we have cone, and we have cube. So we've got these forms to work with. So if I want to do something where it's centralized, I can utilize any one of these objects. So let's just say, for the sake of, we'll put like smack dab in the middle. Pow! Boom. And then to give some degree of emphasis, because let's say we want the flow of our eye to move this way, what we can do is we can drop in a cube here. And let's drop a cube in there. With the emphasis and the goal being on trying to equalize and divide that as much as we possibly can. And for, let's say, just for effect, just to solidify this, we can put another smaller cube right here, avoiding making a tangent. So we want to make sure we get that to where the overlap is really clear. And then let's try to mirror the same thing over on this side. So let's say the beginning edge is about right there. And then we'll let's make it go this way. And in this case, we'll leave a little bit, actually there's a little bit of a line on that side too, so we'll allow that line to stay there. And we'll cheat this one a little bit, and we'll make it a little more shallow so it doesn't accidentally intersect that and cause a potential issue. But there we have our, using those basic forms to really lead the eye and like compositionally, visually take us into the specific area that we need to look. We could also potentially, let's just say for effect, to really push it over the top, we can make like a cube type shape that sits right here that linearly points directly at, hey, look right into that area. And then we can shore up our line work a little bit. We'll just come in here and put a little emphasis on the sort of silhouette read on that. And these cubes didn't really need to shift the way they did, but in the process I kind of tumbled them a little bit, which is okay. It's not the end of the world. And then we got this cube down here that then aims and points, right? So in a purely linear way, we're directing to a centralized place, and we're really forcing the eye to go the direction that we want. Always keep in mind when you're drawing, especially with Prismacolor, you can keep your line weights you can draw them really light in the beginning, and then you can go back in and give them the sort of emphasis that you need. So another way of considering when you start planning your composition is you can go fairly abstract in the beginning. So let's say that for the sake of we want to let's say do some diagonals. So we can plan out like diagonally. Maybe we want to bring, let's use one of our a simple quick diagonal to divide that up, and then maybe it'd be also interesting to add another sort of competing diagonal. And so we'll try to hang some elements on these diagonals. So what we can do is we can just say, for instance, let's drop, and you can do whatever sort of perspective you want. If you want to make these 1 point or 2 point, it's fairly up to you. Like they don't have to be any specific type of vanishing point. So let's say we hang this here on a diagonal. That's wonky right there. Right, and then let's say we want to play with some scale too. And let's say we want to grow this, so let's shift that onto a slightly different angle. And let's shift one more on a slightly different angle. So we get some pretty nice diagonals sort of working, with each other. And let's say we want to put some other objects on some other diagonals. So let's use a sphere. So let's place a sphere there, and again we want to grow the scale of this, and so we'll try to get these to wrap on a little bit of a diagonal, so that gets kind of cropped off, so you can draw through like really lightly. So you can think about how you're composing these. So in this case, I want to be aware of what would be potentially a focal point, and in this case, because this sits closer to the middle, that's probably one of the stronger focal point elements, and we've got some linear elements that drive us through. Now, if our goal is to get us to go from here to looking there, it's very likely that we can put, something that breaks this and overlaps. So maybe we put another overlapping element, like right here, that would lead us from this larger cube. Let's shore that up a little better. So we can go from this larger cube, and then these two cubes would maybe bounce us to this one that maybe would kind of take us back around in that sort of flow. And again, we'll just shore up these lines, give them a little bit more weight, and like draw through as much as you can. Turn your pad. Don't feel like your pad has to stay in that one angle, and you can see that there's times where the lines go through. Oops, that's messed up. They go through other stuff, because our ultimate goal is not to hang like one singular perfect, unyielding line. It's really to get these lines to be as finessed and as alive and have as much vitality as they possibly can. So if we do end up drawing through something in that case, like that's completely okay, because later as we start to do more of these things, you can start to put value on these things and it would like hide a significant amount of those elements. And then too, when our line weights get heavier, like those things get hidden. So imagine that we put value on this, and you don't need to, but if you put value on this and you assume that, this stuff on this side would get the most amount of value, so this is going to get a significant amount of value, and that would get a significant amount of value, assuming that it's in this case on the shadow side. I mean, equally these two, like these would get a good amount of value, and then that's going to get a good amount of value that transitions around. And then this would end up getting a good amount of value that transitions around. And then we'd have to make sense of keeping the separations working. And depending on if we want to make that our more illuminated side, or if we really want the top planes to be more illuminated, then we can effectively put a little bit of value range on there. And then we can make decisions about whether or not this is floating in space or if it's on a ground plane. And if it's floating in space, then we can manipulate how much depth that we create, how much atmosphere that we end up creating for these objects to kind of sit or settle in, and whether or not we want those things to end up either emerging, disappearing, going into a void, so to speak, or if we want them to emerge from darkness, or if we just want them to sit, in space the way they are. We can make all sorts of decisions as we get later on in the process of doing these, and that we start to make decisions about how we want to hold edges, and that we're not going to be super concerned about making absolutely perfect, flawless lines, because we can always come back in and try to shore up the lines that we need to have more clarity and line weight for readability. And so we're trying to practice readability in our drawings, but we're also trying to think about like how we guide eyes through images, especially through using all of these sort of lines, and then using shape and value and lighting as well. Because if we then, let's say for the sake of that, we really want to create stronger degrees of emphasis, especially if we're using value, then we could definitely punch these areas a little bit more. And keep in mind that the greater the contrast, the more your eye is going to move in that area and want to see that. So then we have to think to ourselves, is this our area of emphasis now? If so, then we need to be content with that's where we're trying to push our eye to. If not, then we need to make decisions about how are we going to force people to look in the area that we want. And it's mostly going to be in terms of creating greater degrees of contrast and making areas have higher degrees of value range next to each other. So we could easily let's just do some atmosphere here. Again, this value part is not something that's necessary. I just happen to be discussing it, so I thought I'd just throw it out there. So then you can see even adding this little bit of value then effectively kind of changes like where we're going to start looking at things, and we can build those transitions, and some of that, the grayness of that, the value range there starts to make us not look at this area necessarily as much, because now this starts to share a similar range of value, and then the lighter areas are sitting kind of across here and across these top planes. So if we were animating something, then we could easily get the viewer to read like, oh, pop, 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 and where we'd want them to see things. And if we wanted to really force them to look here, we could potentially even add another element that says look here and go through there. But we're trying to manipulate these diagonals, keep this feeling dynamic, and you can see that it quickly looks more dynamic than this, because we don't really have any true verticals, any true horizontals. Like everything has angles to it, so it quickly creates really interesting sort of dynamic elements. And anytime you're trying to make something feel dynamic, you can put things on diagonals, and it would instantly make things read as really energetic, rhythmic, and dynamic. Especially if you can create some degree of rhythm and pattern visually, then it'll definitely create interesting and fun visual dynamics. So keep that in mind as you're planning things out. And then if your values, again, not sitting on the paper well, it usually means that you need to sharpen your pencil so you can really get in there and work your line weights. So let's think about if we want to do like some leading lines where we want to have very specific like lines that we want to have people follow through the space in the composition. So we can easily just decide, and it's beneficial if you can just kind of plan out, like let's say I want my viewer to look through there, and I want them to end up ending somewhere about right here. And that's how I want their eye to sort of flow through the composition. So if that's ultimately my goal, then I can easily come in here and just plan for what kind of structure would I want to put here, and what do I want to use to lead the eye around. So let's say it would be useful if I used some nice cylindrical elements. Let's just start with one that goes this way, and then maybe I overlap with another one that goes this way, and then I'll distort and add a little bit more volume to these, so that I can really push the idea of depth and stacking these next to each other. And then a really clear overlap is going to happen here where it starts to turn away, and then another that's going to, let's say, flow this way, and then maybe it ends at like some sort of cube element, just for the sake of bam. And then maybe just for the sake of, it would be kind of cool to throw like some sort of like spherical elements. And let's say we put that on a sort of line 2, where it'll have a sort of wrapping effect. And then we can just shore up our line weights. So you can say this line and this line, and then that's going to, let's say, fall behind there. This one sits in front, so we'll give that a little bit more weight. And then these come this way, and then we'll give that a little bit of more emphasis in the volume, and we'll wrap it around here. But we want this one to sit in front a little more, so we'll give that a little bit more weight on the line so it feels like it sits in front. And then we'll just kind of finesse that, and then we'll draw through this. So I'm aware of what feels comfortable for me to make certain marks, so it's a little bit easier to make sense of like how I'm going to handle that. And so that's part of why it's important to practice the mark making a lot, because the more you practice the mark making, the more you start to be acutely aware of like, how do I feel most comfortable making certain marks. And once you start to become aware of that, it'll make your process of drawing a lot easier, because then you'll be a lot more accustomed to that. It does not feel comfortable drawing that form at that angle. And if you don't feel comfortable drawing a form at a certain angle, there's a good chance that you're probably not going to necessarily draw it that well. So it's important, and it's to your advantage to make sense of, do I feel I can make lines comfortably at that angle? And in this case, even though I'm shoring up the lines, I don't want the line weight. So the line weight of all this stuff up here can be much heavier, especially this stuff that's much closer to me. I can give that heavier line weight, maybe even this. I can give those heavier line weight because they're supposed to be closer to me. And the things that are further away, I want to give them much lighter line weights so that they sort of recede in space, and that they're not, that they don't feel like they exist at the same plane. And maybe just for effect, I'll do a couple like cubes, that just so that I can sort of manipulate leading the eye and just creating a couple more overlaps. And let's tilt it so it really, so that we have multiple sort of leading, like eye leading elements. Right, so we've got like this that leads us up there, then we've got like this that leads us around there. So we're intentionally pushing the eye to move in the direction that we expect and we're directing the viewer. But you have to frame all of these, because you can't compose something without proper framing. Like without proper framing, it no matter what, like you're not effectively composing well if you're not making the frame around, because otherwise you're just drawing cool parts and pieces and elements. You need the framing in order to give guidance and direction to where you want the eye to go. Same thing if we needed to do like a pattern. A pattern can be fairly easy if you think of like a fence line, or and you almost are always using multiple things when you're doing this stuff anyway. So we could do both. We can do both diagonals and pattern and lead your eye at the same time. So if we wanted to use a pattern and lead your eye, let's say we do something that's a little more zigzag, so we could effectively start with, let's say we'll do some standing cylinders, and we'll try to create some degree of overlap. So we'll just kind of stack these so that we get this little repeating pattern of going back in space. So it's a fairly repetitious pattern, and it's leading our eye to a specific direction and place. So we're creating this little repeating pattern. And then let's say we'll take it back that way, so we get some more overlap. And then maybe we'll make them slightly smaller, like as they recede even more in space, and we'll just make it feel more dramatic. Boom. And again, you can keep these fairly light so that they don't get like too, and then initially they don't get too heavy in their value. So that's again a really simple sort of like lead pattern, and we're also sort of leading the eye to follow down a pathway. And then if we wanted, we can bounce the eye to move back, because your eye is going to naturally follow along whatever this sort of repeating pattern is to figure out where it's leading you to. And then we could do like a nice little isolated element. Let's do like a little sphere that's just sitting there by itself, and maybe it's sitting on top of like a big giant cylinder. And then we could even make it seem like this is sitting on like a sort of a cube-like pathway to add an even more obnoxious leading the eye sort of pattern. And we'll just give it a little thickness so it doesn't feel flat. We'll just bring that down. So this effectively leads our eye through. It says follow, keep following, keep following, keep following, keep following. And we'll just bring these down and give those a little bit more weight, keeping in mind that the things that are closest to us, we want to give those a little more weight than the things that are further away. Alright, so exploring these concepts of composition is really important, because in the long run, it'll help you to be a little bit more free with your decision making, and it'll also help you later when you start drawing more complicated things, that you won't be hindered by trying to draw the thing before you work out compositional things, the layering, ordering of space, and effectively what you want people to see and how you want them to see it.